Ty left his house in Naples and moved to northern Italy for his studies. He found a tiny room on the highest level of an old and gloomy palace. The building used to be owned by a noble family long ago. Presently, an elderly lady named Signora Elizabeth rented out the rooms to university students from the University of Padua. Giovanni, one of the students, had a small window in his room that provided a view of a spacious garden filled with numerous plants and flowers. One day, he approached Signora Elizabeth and inquired, "Does the garden belong to you?" "Oh, no," Signora Elizabeth responded quickly. "The garden belongs to the famous doctor, Giacomo Rappaccini. People say he uses those plants to create peculiar types of medicine. He resides in that small brown house within the garden, along with his daughter, Beatrice." Giovanni would often sit by his window to admire the garden. He had never seen such a diverse array of plants before. Each plant had enormous green leaves and magnificent flowers in every color of the rainbow. Giovanni's favorite plant, situated in a white marble vase near the house, was adorned with large purple flowers. One day, while Giovanni was gazing out of his window, he noticed an old man wearing a black cape strolling through the garden. The old man stood tall and had a slender figure. His face had a sickly yellow hue, and his black eyes were chillingly cold. He wore thick gloves on his hands and a mask over his mouth and nose. With great caution, he moved among the plants as if he were navigating through a territory filled with wild animals or venomous snakes. Although he observed the flowers intently, he refrained from touching or smelling any of them. When the old man reached the plant with the large purple flowers, he paused. Removing his mask, he called out loudly, "Beatrice, come help me." From inside the house, a warm and youthful voice responded, "I am coming, Father." "What do you need?" A young woman emerged into the garden, her thick dark hair cascading around her shoulders in curls. Her cheeks had a rosy hue, and her eyes were strikingly large and black. As she gracefully moved among the plants, she exuded vitality, health, and energy. Giovanni believed she was as beautiful as the purple flowers in the marble vase. The old man exchanged words with her, their conversation carrying a sense of urgency and importance. Beatrice nodded her head in understanding as she delicately touched and smelled the flowers that her father had taken great care to avoid. Several weeks later, Giovanni paid a visit to Pietro Baglioni, a friend of his father's who taught medicine at the university. During their conversation, Giovanni inquired about Dr. Rappaccini. "He is a great scientist," Professor Baglioni replied, his tone tinged with caution, "but he is also a dangerous man." Surprised by this statement, Giovanni asked, "Why do you say that?" The older man shook his head slowly and explained, "Rappaccini prioritizes his scientific pursuits over the well-being of people. He has created numerous deadly poisons from the plants in his garden, believing that he can cure illnesses with these very poisons." "It is true," Professor Baglioni responded with a solemn expression, "that on several occasions, Rappaccini has managed to cure individuals who were gravely ill and considered beyond hope. However, his medicines have also caused the deaths of many others. I believe he would willingly sacrifice any life, even his own, for the sake of his experiments." Giovanni, intrigued, asked about Rappaccini's daughter. "What about Beatrice Rappaccini?" he inquired. "I am sure he loves her." The old professor smiled at Giovanni and replied, "Indeed, you have heard of Beatrice Rappaccini. People say she is exceptionally beautiful. However, few men in Padua have ever had the chance to see her, as she never leaves her father's garden." As the sun began to set, Giovanni left Professor Baglioni's house and stopped by a flower shop, where he purchased fresh flowers. Returning to his room, he sat by the window, the fading light of the day casting a gentle glow. The garden was serene, and the purple flowers of Giovanni's favorite plant appeared to radiate in the evening's dwindling light. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the doorway of the little brown house. It was Beatrice. She entered the garden and gracefully moved among the plants, occasionally bending down to touch a leaf or inhale the scent of a flower. With each step, Rappaccini's daughter seemed to grow even more stunning. When she reached the purple plant, she buried her face in its blossoms. Giovanni overheard Beatrice's soft words, "Give me your breath, my sister. The ordinary air weakens me. Give me one of your beautiful flowers." With delicate care, Beatrice plucked one of the largest flowers and held it, poised to adorn her dark hair. As she lifted the flower, a few drops of liquid fell from its petals, landing on the head of a tiny lizard that had been crawling near Beatrice's feet. In an instant, the lizard convulsed violently, and then it ceased moving altogether. Beatrice, unfazed by the lizard's fate, let out a sigh and gracefully placed the flower in her hair. Intrigued, Giovanni leaned further out of the window, watching this peculiar scene unfold. At that moment, Giovanni leaned out further to catch a better glimpse of Beatrice. Just then, a beautiful butterfly flew over the garden wall. It seemed drawn to Beatrice, circling her head before coming to a sudden halt, its wings still. To Giovanni's astonishment, the butterfly fell lifeless to the ground. Beatrice shook her head sadly and, in that instant, her eyes met Giovanni's gaze from the window above. Sensing his admiration, Giovanni swiftly gathered the flowers he had purchased and tossed them down to Beatrice as a gift from Giovanni Visconti. "Thank you," Beatrice softly replied, her voice carrying through the air. She gracefully retrieved the flowers from the ground and hurriedly made her way back to the house. Before entering, she paused at the doorway, offering a shy wave to Giovanni, a fleeting connection between their hearts. To Giovanni's dismay, he noticed that the flowers he had thrown to Beatrice were now turning brown in her hands. Troubled by this sight, he made a conscious effort to avoid looking out of the window that overlooked Rappaccini's garden. He regretted ever engaging with Beatrice, for her beauty had cast an enchanting spell over him, and he felt a mix of fascination and fear. The memory of the lizard and the butterfly's sudden demise lingered in his mind, serving as a haunting reminder of the power surrounding Beatrice. Days passed, and Giovanni found himself distancing from the window, hoping to break free from the hold of Beatrice's allure. However, his attempts were in vain, for he remained captivated by her presence. One day, as he made his way home from his classes, he unexpectedly crossed paths with Professor Baglioni on the street. "Giovanni, my boy, have you forgotten me?" the old man greeted him, examining him closely. Concern was etched across his face as he observed the changes in Giovanni's appearance since their last encounter. "What troubles you, my friend?" "You look different," the professor inquired, his voice filled with genuine worry. Giovanni's once vibrant countenance had transformed into a pallid complexion, and his eyes seemed to radiate with a feverish intensity. They stood there, engaged in a conversation, while Giovanni's inner turmoil continued to consume him. As Giovanni and Professor Baglioni conversed, a figure emerged from the end of the street. This man was draped in a long black cape, moving with a sluggishness that hinted at ailing health. His face bore a sickly yellow hue, yet his eyes remained piercing and dark. Giovanni recognized him as the same individual he had observed in Rappaccini's garden. As the man approached, he nodded in a distant manner towards Professor Baglioni, but his gaze fixated upon Giovanni, displaying a notable curiosity. There was an eerie intensity in his scrutiny, as if he held a keen interest in Giovanni's presence. "Dr. Rappaccini," Professor Baglioni whispered after the old man had passed them, "has he ever seen your face before?" Giovanni shook his head, replying, "No, I don't think so." The professor's expression grew concerned. "I believe he has seen you before," I know that cold look of his. He wears it when he examines an animal he has killed in one of his experiments. Giovanni, I am certain that you are the subject of one of Rappaccini's experiments. Giovanni stepped back, disbelieving. You must be joking, he protested. Professor Baglioni firmly grasped Giovanni's arm. I assure you, I am serious. Be cautious, my young friend. You are in great danger. Giovanni withdrew his arm and quickly excused himself, stating, I must be going. Good night. As he hurried back to his room, a sense of confusion and fear overwhelmed him. One day, Giovanni discovered a hidden entrance to Rappaccini's garden. Curiosity getting the better of him, he entered the garden and was greeted by a sight of wild and unnatural plants. It became clear to Giovanni that these peculiar and extraordinary flowers were the result of Rappaccini's experiments. Suddenly, Beatrice, Rappaccini's daughter, appeared in the garden. She moved swiftly among the flowers until she stood before Giovanni. Apologizing for intruding without permission, Giovanni felt welcomed as Beatrice smiled at him. She acknowledged his admiration for the flowers and remarked that he must have come to get a closer look at her father's rare collection. As they conversed, Giovanni couldn't help but notice a captivating fragrance in the air surrounding Beatrice. Uncertain whether the enchanting scent emanated from the flowers or Beatrice's breath, Giovanni engaged in conversation with her. She inquired about his home and family, while he discovered that Beatrice had spent her entire life in the garden. Talking to her, Giovanni felt as if he were conversing with a spirited and innocent child. Her presence sparkled like clear water. They strolled leisurely through the garden, discussing various topics. Eventually, they arrived at a stunning plant adorned with large purple flowers. Giovanni couldn't help but notice that the fragrance of those flowers resembled the scent of Beatrice's breath, only much stronger. Compelled by curiosity, he reached out to pluck one of the purple flowers, but his action was met with a scream that pierced his heart. Beatrice swiftly grabbed his hand, exerting all her strength to pull it away. Never touch those flowers, she cried, they will take your life. With tears streaming down her face, she fled into the house. In that moment, Giovanni noticed Dr. Rappaccini standing in the garden. That night, Giovanni's thoughts revolved around the sweetness and beauty of Beatrice, eventually lulling him to sleep. However, upon awakening the next morning, he was gripped by intense pain. It felt as if his hand was engulfed in flames. To his astonishment, he discovered a purple mark on his hand resembling the impressions of 4 fingers and a thumb. Yet, consumed by his love for Beatrice, Giovanni disregarded the pain and remained captivated by her presence. Giovanni's daily encounters with Beatrice in the garden grew more frequent, and eventually, she confessed her love for him. However, she made it clear that she would never allow him to kiss her or even hold her hand. Several weeks later, Professor Baglioni paid Giovanni a visit, expressing concern over his prolonged absence from university classes. Annoyed by the interruption, Giovanni denied that anything was wrong and wished for the professor to leave. But the old man persisted, removing his hat and taking a seat. With a sense of urgency, Professor Baglioni warned Giovanni to steer clear of Rappaccini and his daughter. He revealed a disturbing truth: Beatrice had been subjected to poison since infancy, which had permeated her blood and tainted her breath. Overwhelmed by the revelation, Giovanni was filled with shock and disbelief. He couldn't fathom the extent of Rappaccini's sinister plans. With his face buried in his hands, he cried out in anguish. Professor Baglioni attempted to comfort him, assuring him that it was not too late to save both himself and Beatrice. He presented a small silver bottle containing a potent antidote that could neutralize even the most potent poison. Urging Giovanni to give it to Beatrice, the professor placed the precious bottle on the table before leaving Giovanni's room, leaving him to contemplate the weight of their situation. Giovanni desperately wanted to believe that Beatrice was innocent and that their love was genuine. However, Professor Balion's words had planted seeds of doubt in his heart. As Giovanni groomed himself, he couldn't help but notice his own handsome appearance in the mirror. His eyes sparkled, and his face radiated with a healthy glow. He reassured himself that the poison had not yet infected his body. But as he spoke, his gaze fell upon the flowers he had bought that morning. A wave of horror washed over him, causing his body to tremble. The flowers in Giovanni's hands were withering and turning brown, mirroring the horror that filled his heart. His face grew pale as he gazed at his reflection in the mirror. Suddenly, his attention was caught by a spider crawling near the window. He leaned over and blew a breath of air at it, only to witness the spider trembling and falling lifeless. In a whispered curse, he realized the deadly truth: his own breath was poison. At that moment, a melodious voice floated up from the garden, calling out to Giovanni. "Giovanni, you're late. Come down." Filled with anguish, Giovanni shouted as he descended to meet Beatrice, "You are a monster." Giovanni's voice trembled with bitterness and anguish as he responded to Beatrice, "And with your poison, you have made me into a monster too. I am imprisoned in this garden, Beatrice." He could see the genuine confusion in her eyes as she pleaded for understanding, denying any knowledge of his transformation. "Why are you saying these terrible things? While I am bound to this garden, you are free to roam wherever you please." The atmosphere grew tense as Giovanni's gaze hardened with hatred. "Do not pretend that you don't know what you have done to me." Suddenly, a group of insects flew into the garden, encircling Giovanni's head. Filled with anger, he blew his breath at them, causing the insects to fall lifeless to the ground. Beatrice's scream pierced the air, realization dawning upon her. "I see it now. My father's science has done this to us. Giovanni, please believe me, I did not ask him to do this to you. All I ever wanted was to love you." Giovanni's anger softened into sadness as he recalled the medicine given to him by Professor Balioni. Giovanni, filled with hope, suggested that the medicine might hold the key to destroying the poison within their bodies and restoring them to normal. He reassured Beatrice, saying, "Our fate is not so terrible, dear Beatrice." Displaying the small silver bottle containing the medicine, he explained its potential effects to her. Beatrice hesitated but eventually agreed to drink the medicine first, urging Giovanni to wait and observe its effects on her before he consumed it. With caution, she took a small sip from the bottle. At that very moment, Dr. Rappaccini emerged from his house, approaching the young couple with a serene gesture as if bestowing a blessing upon them. "My daughter," he declared, "you are no longer alone in this world." He instructed Beatrice to offer Giovanni one of the purple flowers from her favorite plant, assuring her that it would not harm him. "Now," he continued, "my science and your love have made him different from ordinary men." Beatrice confronted her father with a mixture of weakness and confusion, questioning why he would subject his own child to such a terrible fate. Dr. Rappaccini appeared taken aback by her accusation, genuinely surprised as he asked, "What do you mean, my daughter? Have I done something wrong?" Beatrice, though weakly, expressed her desire to be loved rather than feared. However, in the end, she conceded that their current circumstances no longer mattered. "I am leaving you, father," Beatrice uttered weakly. "I will go where the poison you have given me will do no harm. Goodbye to you, Giovanni." With those final words, Beatrice collapsed to the ground, lifeless, at the feet of her father and Giovanni. The poison that had been intertwined with her proved to be too deeply ingrained. The very medicine intended to rid her of the poison had inadvertently led to her demise.